Hi, my name is Randy Lubin. I'm a game designer who makes serious games that explore the future and explain complex systems. Today I'm going to walk you through a game design document template that I've used in the past that helps get teams, especially big complex teams, aligned on the game design and help you through the game design process. I find that this type of doc can be really helpful about getting everybody on the same page in terms of priorities, having them focus on the right questions at the right time, and make sure that the ultimate outcomes of the game are aligned to the needs of the organization or project or whatever the situation happens to be. So I'm going to walk you through this, the different parts. I'll give you some color commentary. And this document itself, I'll have a link in the video. And totally free to use and remix. It's a Creative Commons Zero dedication, so totally free. You don't even need to cite me. Although if you want to link to me and give me credit, all the better. But really, it's yours to use and remix as you see fit. So without further ado, here's the quick walkthrough. The very top of the doc is just a very quick, what is the intention of this document? Sometimes the entire game design, all the key details live within this doc. More often you'll have some separate documents too, so this is just to say, hey, this is the doc where the key information is gathered, and it'll have links to everywhere else. There's a team section. I know with teams, especially when you're working on a game with multiple different organizations in the mix, just having a list of who's involved, which organization, which role, what's their email address, just makes it really easy to keep everyone in the loop. And when you're sending emails out to everyone or adding people to a new document, you don't miss out on including somebody. Then, this section can grow quite a bit depending on the complexity of the project, but links to the other relevant documents. That could be background information that's really useful to have. It could be slide decks that might be used in the facilitation of a game, or it could be really nitty-gritty docs. So, for example, if we're building out lots of different situation scenarios, player handouts, etc., there could be links to each of those living in their own documents or slide decks. And then having a high level, what's the goal and key outcomes of this project? Again, just one of the first things that people see when they come to this, quickly getting up to speed. What are the goals and outcomes? And also, if you keep those goals and outcomes in mind, that can help with a lot of decisions down the road. I find it's often one of the most important things is getting people really aligned on what are the goals, so that as we have trade-offs, we can say which of these best align with our goals, and then separately, what are the outcomes? Because for me, at least, a lot of game design is working backwards from the outcomes that you want to see to make sure that the whole game is aligned toward delivering those outcomes. And so again, putting those front and center, first page, really helpful to get the team on the same page and keep them on the same page, and to help with working through some of those tough design decisions. Moving on, the next is usually a bit of key information drilling down into the game itself. So project definition aside, what's the quick pitch for the game? Is this an in-person game, a digital game? Is it an hour game, a full day game, digital, analog, all of those? Just this should be no more than a paragraph, but the kind of thing that you can just quickly copy paste as you're talking to other key stakeholders, and something that's external facing too. So something that's just really helpful the gazillion times that you'll have to say, hey, can you just tell me a little bit about what you're working on? Can you just send it an email? So getting that game pitch, and it's fine if that evolves over time. That's the kind of thing that might start off real fuzzy, and by the end, it's a really punchy pitch. Then some session details. This is again, will start out usually underdefined, but how many players, how many facilitators, either facilitators in general or per player. What are details about the venue? How long will a session last? What materials are needed? All of this is really helpful. Both in terms of scope. So early on in the process, this might not be well defined, but you're going to want to converge on at least a pretty rough boundary early on to constrain your design space. And then also later on, as you're bringing in other stakeholders, they can be quickly oriented toward, oh, this is actually meant for small teams, or oh no, this is a 100-person mega game. We need to make sure we have a venue that supports it. And then likewise, what are the launch details? This is really helpful in terms of, is this something that's going to run once and never again? Or are we going to have a lot of different sessions? Do we need to have planning to train facilitators? So depending on the type of game you're doing, this will be more or less helpful and more or less in depth. But it's usually just good to get these explicitly called out, or even if they haven't been decided yet, saying, hey, we have no idea how many sessions we're running, but we know this is going to be a multi-session thing. We want to design something that's reusable, as opposed to occasionally you do things that don't scale for something that you just run once and you're going to be there in the room. Continuing on, the next section is design guidelines. So the idea here is to get a lot of the things that will really shape some of the key design decisions. So this is maybe not as useful for the external stakeholders, but for the core design team, this is where you get the most alignment. And so desired insights is really important. So especially if you have downstream processes, maybe the play reports or the actions players take will be rolled up into a report or fed into some sort of scenario planning. There are a million different things you can do downstream, but this is really all about making sure that's captured in front and center, because again, if you know what your outcomes and your outputs are going to be, then that really helps simplify the design process, because you can very quickly say, hey, does this align with what we're doing or not? And everything else can sort of crystallize around that. Likewise, if there are key inputs, like it could be that upstream from this was a existing scenario process that resulted in like 2 or 3 key scenarios that are going to be worked into the game. Or, it could be that like you're dealing with a really complex system and there's a model for how that complex system works. And so you want to be really familiar with that model. So again, this is helpful for making sure any designers and collaborators can quickly like be aware of like what's feeding into this. Can we make sure that the game aligns with it? So align with with what's coming in from upstream, and make sure that the outputs are really well aligned for the next steps downstream. So key inputs, key outputs. Key outputs are just what I'm talking about. And so we talked about the general design, the general design insights and desired insights, and then key inputs and key outputs that can align with that. And then and right, that could be internal or external, right? So it could be that the actions and insights are synthesized into a report on the topic by the organizing team or sponsor, or it could be that the players are being asked to present their takeaways to their own organizations. If the latter is the case, then you probably want some way of them capturing all the notes about what their takeaways are as part of the debrief or throughout the game itself. And then key constraints. That's just, again, have this front and center when you're talking about other design decisions. This could be budget, number of attendees, topics that are allowed or prohibited. Oftentimes when dealing with certain organizations, there are political sensitivities involved. Sometimes real potential risks that you want to shield your participants from. So, for example, you might need anonymity to be a key factor. So anyway, topics that are allowed or prohibited, ways to protect the attendees, etc., or just like the more mundane things of budget, attendance, duration. But again, have these up front so that it narrows down the design space and it isn't an unpleasant surprise later where somebody comes in and says, hey, we were designing this for 10 people, but we really need it to work for 50. Well, now you got to go back to the drawing board probably. So better to get all this defined up front to the extent that you can. Next up, and this is helpful for longer-term multi-stakeholder projects, just have a good timeline. All of these steps might not be relevant to you, but I just wanted to get these down here. Start with some sort of timeline. It helps get everyone on the same page. Lets everyone sort of know that there's a plan. I call out playstorming here. I'll have another video that talks a little bit more about playstorming, but the idea is that before things are really ready for a playtest, where, again, I'm a huge believer in playtests, so that it's such a great way to get all these insights, see what's working, see what's not, see what players want to do but you don't support that you actually might want to change the game to support. Playtesting is a huge part of that, but before you get to playtesting, I often recommend playstorming, where you have something that's very underbaked. You don't have the full game developed, you don't have the full rules based out, but you can sometimes it's you and your collaborators just talking through what a player might do at any given point. Sometimes you're having people come in and play, but you're making up the rules on the fly. And there are a lot of ways to do it, but I think early on you're about discovery and ideation, then you're working through designs and playstorming. Then you playtest and refine, and then from there, you're polishing materials, training facilitators if that's a necessary step, running the actual sessions. Sense making is about, okay, the sessions happened, we learned a bunch, what do we do with those learnings, and really how we prepare it for downstream. And then finally, a project debrief, which can be really helpful. Just like, okay, what do we learn, especially if you're going to be working with the same collaborators again, what do we learn from this project? How might we want to improve on that, or what changes might we want to make to our process for the next one? So anyway, it's good to get a rough timeline down. This also helps orient you so you're not missing any key steps. You can also add in here, like if you need some key sign off from some sponsors, or you need like a key review a bit, getting that locked in can be really helpful. Or if you know that, you know what the session dates are, you can plan from there on back. This next section is current design questions. I find that usually throughout the process, at any given time, there's 1 to 3 like big questions that you might be wrestling with. In the beginning, it might be, what's the format for this? Is this a full day thing or a 1 hour thing? Is it 50 people or 5 people per session? And so, you can write down those big forks, but it could also be something like much more in the weeds of, okay, is it 2 rounds or 3 rounds? Is it people broken up into 4 different factions, or is everyone playing as the same team? Those types of things. But just calling out, hey, here's what we're thinking about. Maybe here's what the trade-offs are. And by capturing it here, it makes it salient, and it keeps people focused of like, hey, here are the questions we really care about. But also for folks who are involved in the project, but maybe not on a day-to-day basis, they can quickly sort of see what the major questions are and weigh in. So they can still quickly get up to speed and be giving feedback on what matters most at the moment. Next section is game details. This is, again, as you start, this will start very fuzzy or unfilled out, but as you proceed in the collaboration process, it'll get more and more drilled in. And so this is the agenda for a given session. So like what has to happen before the session. Usually it's some sort of introduction, onboarding, maybe some workshopping to get people up to speed. If you're talking about safety, this is a good time to talk about safety. And then, the gameplay itself. Is it broken into multiple rounds? What's happening during those rounds? Are they, and this is, again, high level, but to give everyone who's collaborating a good sense of what's the flow of the game. Debrief, ideally there's debrief. Oftentimes you get as much value out of the debrief as the session itself. So the debrief should be very much designed as much as any other part of the game. And then finally, post-session work. If after every session a certain amount of synthesis has to happen or analysis has to happen, like, great, call that out here. And then drilling one level deeper, and this isn't true for all games, but for a lot of our games at least, it'll be played in multiple rounds, and each round will look loosely the same. And so this is in each round, here's what happens. Players are brainstorming their top interventions to advance their faction's interests, or players are writing headlines that reflect the updated state of the world and the actions they've taken, something like that. And so you want to brainstorm and then articulate what's happening there. Likewise, how are players organized into roles and factions is a good place to call out and break this out high level. What's the key game state? And how are you tracking it? So sometimes the answer is there is no game state. Sometimes we have a very complex 4-tab spreadsheet. But just talking about like, here, what is it? And likewise, if this will not all be decided up front, and you might have multiple different options. It's totally fine to carve out the options here and then reference it in the previous page that was talking about here's our current design forks and design decisions. But saying, hey, look, here's two paths we can go down. Let people comment in the doc, and then ultimately you'll lock in one and clean it up. Finally, mechanics. What are the actions that players can take? How do they affect game state? Again, for some games, the answer is really like, there's no game state, so the mechanics are just like they submit one idea, and sometimes it's like, oh no, players can buy this resource over here and then trade it, and then if they come to one of the like facilitators, the facilitators will then enter into a spreadsheet. So it can get really complex, and oftentimes things like player role, game state, and mechanics end up getting linked out to their own docs. So game state might live in a spreadsheet. Handouts for players might live in a doc or slides, and mechanics you might have your own big doc just full of how all the different mechanics work. So again, the summary can live here, but expand or collapse this as you see fit. One of the final sections is sense-making and next steps. So this is, okay, you've run one or multiple sessions. What is the plan for taking those outputs, synthesizing them, and using them downstream? Just have that plan here up front. And maybe the actual work happens in here if it's a small project, or maybe you have a different document for that, or different meetings aligned with that later. And that's the last section, and it talks about the next step. So again, this is always keeping one eye to why are we doing this game? What are the key outcomes? What are the outputs of game sessions that align with those outcomes that you want to drive? And so again, having this as part of the main planning doc all helps orient everybody toward those good outcomes. But that's the quick high level tour of this game design document template. I'll have a link in the comment section or in the info box. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. This will be a living document that I'll update as I hear back from folks. It'll probably grow to the point where nobody's going to use all of it, but it's a good starting place, and you just cut and remix the stuff that doesn't work for you. But if you use it and you have suggestions, if you use it and you have a success story to share, I'd love to hear it. So share it in the comments, or if you want, come join us at the Foresight Games community. We're a group of like-minded folks who love exploring how games can be used for good and for exploring the future. But there are a lot of folks who are only tipping their toe into game design or only tangentially exploring the future. And so if this is at all remotely interesting to you, please come join us. We mostly hang out in a Discord. There's a mailing list too. We have roughly monthly meetups where we have hangouts and lightning talks. We do some show and tell about cool applied games that we've seen. So I encourage you to come check us out and share what you're working on too. And finally, I do most of my game design through Leveraged Play, which is my consulting firm. We've been lucky to have lots of great clients. UNICEF, World Economic Forum, United Nations, Hewlett Foundation, Mozilla, doing in-person games, digital games. And so if you are interested in collaborating or commissioning a game or sponsoring a game, please reach out to me. My contact info is on the Leverage Play site. And if you're just curious and wanna learn more about this expanding field of Foresight games, I'm always happy to chat, happy to geek out on it. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks for watching.